Well, good evening and welcome to Talktoberfest, another hard-hitting adventure with a bunch of guys from WBT. I'm Mark Garrison, and in the little box over there is my friend Jeff Atkinson and Brandon Hamilton. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Mark.
Go, Mark.
So I've done this for a couple of years. By the way, I should mention that we thank our friends at Dry Otter Waterproofing for sponsoring this. All of a sudden, we've got people already online saying hi there. So hi there to all of you who have said hi there to us.
Hello.
I thought we would start a little bit this evening, though, talking about you guys just a bit. Brandon, you're pretty new with us. How long have you been? It seems like you've been around for a long time here now. You just fit right in so well. But how long have you been with us now?
Well, it's hard not to fit in with all you guys, but it's been almost 7 months now. So it's one of those weird things where, it feels like I've been here for 7 years, but then at the same time, it's gone by so quick. So.
And he hasn't quit. Yeah. We haven't run him off yet.
Yeah, but now, it's been great.
You worked with our friends at WPTF in Raleigh for a while, and then you were in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I had worked in Raleigh for about 5.5 years.
Oh, wow.
And then late 2017 was when I moved to upstate New York and worked for a Christian radio network up there called Family Life and did that for almost about 5.5 years.
Wow. And of course, Jeff Atkinson, you all know, because he was on Channel 3 for how many years, Jeff? Long time.
It was a long time. When I started, I didn't have gray hair. But I think I came to Charlotte in 1996 and had worked at 2 other television stations prior to coming to WBTV. And I was down there for 17 years and then got out of the news business in 2012, but continued to stay associated with WBT because radio was my first love. That's what I've started out in.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
A couple years ago.
What was your and by the way, for those of you who are chiming in, ask us anything you want. We will read all the questions and do our best to tell you some kind of story about it. So you started in radio, Jeff? Where?
I started in radio. It was funny how this happened. This was 1979. I graduated from high school in 1980. In my senior year in high school, a friend of mine was the student body president. And at the high school I went to, the student body president gave the morning announcements. And so that was involved. I mean, this is way back in the dark ages. And so the student body president would come on the PA system in the morning at 9 o'clock or whatever time school started and give, here's what's happening today and here's the lunch menu. Well, he, believe it or not, was the student body president, but didn't really like doing that kind of thing. And so he asked me, would you like to do it? And I said, well, of course, I'd love to. So I went in each day and I took this job seriously. I prepared notes, I prepared jokes. I just had a great time with it. And after about a week or so of doing it, a couple of the teachers came to me and said, you've got a pretty good voice. And I said, well, thank you. And he said, you ought to go to the local radio station, because they're always looking for people to do, be a DJ. You should do that. Well, I wanted to go into journalism, but I thought that was something I would do later. But but I ended up going to the first radio station I went to was an FM station in Fulton, Missouri, and it's still there.
Oh, wow.
It's KKCA FM, and it was a rock and roll top 40 type station that also had a country side, had an AM station, KFAL, and they played country music. And it was a clear channel station, not the clear channel, the big outfit. This was a clear channel, like 900 on the dial and could stretch all across Missouri. And so that's where I got my start way back, like I say, a long time ago.
Wow. Yeah, I started when I was 13 years old in the Southern Pines, Pinehurst area. Got a job at a little 9-volt AM, and it was a lot of fun working through high school and just sort of decided that, I think I like doing this because I like to just talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good gig. Beats manual labor.
Isn't that the truth? Boomer likes to say that. Boomer will, if we're having a tough day or something, Boomer will say, well, at least we're not in the hospital or digging ditches. And we all go, yeah, you're right. So we'll stop whining now. So Diva Broussard, forgive me for putting my glasses on, says, Mark, what is the weirdest county fair food you've eaten?
Oh,
Like that
I
one.
might have to think about that for a
Yeah.
minute. Wow. In my most recent adventure in Raleigh, I guess, as odd as this sounds, I think the strangest thing that I ate was something called oh, what did they call it? Trash in a bucket.
No.
That's what they called it. And is this barbecue joint from down east, and they just have they're selling a big bucket, big like your kid's plastic bucket, and they're on the bottom there's a layer of fries, then there's a layer of beans, then there's coleslaw, then there's barbecue, and then more coleslaw, and then a lot of sauce, and they just go here. And it's just such an odd combination. I would say
It sounds good though. Did you try it?
actually, yeah, it was actually pretty good. It really was. Let's see. Mark Cassidy Hooper says a new restaurant to try, Culinary Dropout. I love the name. I think I read something about it. I do need to check that out.
Today was their 5th day.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, new restaurant.
You know, there are so many restaurants I need to try. I mean, it's like they just open up every day in Charlotte.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many. It's almost
Have
over.
have you seen a lot of restaurants probably come since Johnson and Wales came a number of years ago? Because that was one of the things that they said
think
would
so.
happen whenever, the university came to uptown Charlotte.
Well, I used to do a television story called a television show called Food Stories, and it was just all about local restaurants. And that was in the early 2000s. And since then, I would guess that the number of restaurants since we stopped doing that show has probably tripled in this area because it's just, I mean, it's exploded around NODA and areas. Even off Freedom Drive now, you've got some nice restaurants. That used to be where they sold crack, Those used to be really rough neighborhoods, and now there's some nice restaurants along there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt,
Brandon, what's been
Matt
your favorite
Collison.
restaurant?
Do what?
I was going to ask Brandon what his favorite restaurant has been since he's come to town.
Ooh, oh, that's a tough one. Oh man, you have to put me on the spot for that one. Well, there's been a couple. Actually, I'll tell you, one of my favorites was one of the first ones we tried. It was actually a food truck. I'm trying to remember the name of it actually, but they do fried chicken, and what they do is they add a little spice to it, and then they serve it on a honey roll. And so you get the sweet and the spicy together.
Oh,
Really, really good. But it's a food truck, kind of more in the University City area. That my wife and I had tried when we first moved here, and that was one of the best things that we've tried since we've got here. It's still been tough to beat. We're like, man, that chicken sandwich could put a run for the money for anybody.
wow.
Talk about the chicken sandwich wars, that we had like 5-10 years ago. They do a phenomenal job.
Rodney on here has mentioned the first thing he looks for now is the health score in restaurants because we do. In fact, tomorrow morning at 8:35 with Bo and Sugar Beth, we'll do the health inspections for restaurants that did not do so well. It is fascinating to me how many restaurants, because most of these restaurants, a violation is only worth about 2 points, a deduction of 2 points. So it takes a lot of problems for a restaurant to get down into the 80s or the 70s, even worse. But it's amazing how many restaurants will just pile up. Brandon sometimes is in the newsroom when I'm printing out these inspection reports. Some of them are about book size of restaurants that have struggled because they have so many issues.
What's been the lowest that you remember seeing? Because there's been a lot of 80s. I mean, I think I've
70 is the lowest I've ever, because below 70 they will tend to shut you down. If you get into the 60s, it's like, we think you need to close for a while. And I get this question a lot too about closing restaurants. When basically, if there's a roach infestation, if there's no running hot water, if there's sewage backed up in the kitchen, and we've had that happen a few times, they will shut you down on the spot. And then beyond that, you would have to get less than 70.
Yeah, I say, it's easy to think when you see one of those scores. I think to like schooling days and think, oh, well, if it's in the 80s, that's not too bad, because if I got something in the 80s, I was always happy. All right, let's go. C's get degrees, but that's not the way at the restaurant. That's a different world.
Yeah, Matt Tollison. By the way, Matt Tollison, the name you see on there, you know who his dad is? Ron Tollison, our chief engineer.
Oh.
Yeah. Matt is a good singer. Ron is not. But
Matt says
he stays away from B or lower. Yeah, I do too. Honestly, now if I go in somewhere and there's a 92, I kind of like, I don't know if I want to stay here or not.
We've been to restaurants in Victoria. My wife has gone to the restroom or whatever, and we'll see a critter on the floor, and she'll come back and she's, we're leaving. I'm like, oh, that's the bathroom. The kitchen's different.
And then you're like, hold on, tell Mark.
There is a restaurant near the station. I will not name it because they have good health scores now. But once years ago, my wife and I went to dinner there, and she looked and shrieked, and there was this roach crawling up the wall. And at that point, it was like, she was like, can we leave? I was like, yeah, I guess so. But you don't see too many of those. What are some of your favorite foods? What do you guys like to eat? I see that Brandon, I mean, he eats anything, stuff. He's like Anna. I mean, Anna brings all kinds of stuff to the newsroom. She's eating constantly. She likes Slim Jims. And I'll look over there, and once she's eating on a Slim Jim, and next she's opened up a fresh avocado, and she's eating. I mean, she just eats and eats and eats. But she's trim. I have to tell you, she's trim. She's not. Yeah. But what do you guys like to eat?
Well, go ahead, Jeff. I'll let you take a crack.
Well, I was going to say I like to eat Brandon's wife's. What did she call those things?
The protein balls. Yes.
Protein balls. Have you you've not been there, Mark, when Brandon has shared the protein balls from his wife, Christy?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'm going to have to share one with Mark now.
But see, you guys eat healthier than I do. That sounds dangerously healthy.
It's good. It's a mixture.
Tell us what's in it, Brandon.
Yeah, so she's kind of like a mad scientist with it. She puts a little bit of everything in it. So there's obviously oatmeal, there's peanut butter, there's coconut. She'll douse it just on the top with a little bit of cinnamon. But then the nice little special treat is she'll put some dark chocolate chips in there. And so then you get a nice little sweet mixed with the actual healthy side. So you get a mixture, the sweet and some health.
Well, see, both of you guys work out a lot, right? I'm sorry, Jeff, you were going to talk about your favorite.
No, I was just going to say on Thursday maybe Thursday or Friday last week, Mark was at the state fair, or maybe you were off, and I filled in for you. And I remember thinking, boy, I'm getting kind of hungry. It was 9 o'clock. And of course, I've been there for, I don't know, whatever time, dark 30 when we arrived. And I was thinking, boy, it would sure be nice if we had one of those protein balls, but I wasn't going to ask Brandon because I thought, well, I'm going to take all his food from him, and he goes and reaches for them and hands one to me from the refrigerator, and it was great. So tell your wife thanks.
Yes, I will. She always makes enough and says, "All right, go share." So.
Yeah.
See, but he's never shared with me.
Yes.
I guess he knows it's like offering me something healthy is like, that's a loss.
I'll still give you one. You don't have to like it if I give it to you.
In fact, Rodney England on here says, bah humbug on healthy food. I just want satisfying food. I'm with you on that, Rodney.
Just in case it's the last meal, he says.
That's why you eat dessert first, right? You eat the dessert first in case it's the last one.
So I go to a cardiologist, and he's like, and every time I see him, he goes, you do realize you're carrying around some extra pounds. It's like, I don't know. He says it as if it's going to come as a big surprise. No, really? And then he always goes into this lecture about, you're familiar with the Mediterranean diet. Yes, I'm familiar. I'm going to the state fair, Doc. I'm sorry.
Right, exactly. I'll start that next week.
We can talk the Mediterranean later. I can't afford to go there. So Matt Tollison with another tip always says, check the restrooms in restaurants and that is a pretty good tip for the overall cleanliness of a restaurant. Though I have to say, I've been to restaurants that have low health scores, but clean restrooms. But generally speaking, if they're not going to take very good care of the restroom, it's probably not too clean in the kitchen either.
How did you get started doing those restaurant reviews? How did that all originate? Do you remember?
Oh, I do. It is a very interesting story. My oldest son, Cameron, actually used to do a show on Saturday afternoons on WBT from 2 to 4. It was just kind of a talk show, and he was only 21 years old. And I, at the time, was doing a lot of traveling with a company I owned, and I happened to be in Wilmington, and I was watching WECT. And at that time, they had a guy who did dirty restaurants, and he would end the report the same every time. He would stand in front of the dirty restaurant, and he would leer into the camera and go, "Clean it up." It was hilarious. But when I saw that, I came back and I told Cameron, I said, "You need to do this bit on your show." I said, "I think I got something flying around here." Um, I said, "I think this will be hilarious." So he started, and in those days they were not online. He had to go to the health department and go through them by hand.
Yeah.
And so he started doing the reports on Saturday afternoon. That was my first exposure to it. And interestingly enough, he turned that into a business ultimately, and that's what he still does today, as he sells software to health departments around the country for their health inspections.
That's
So
awesome.
we've been involved in that in one form or another for about 20 years now. And so
God,
when I started doing Charlotte at 6, I thought, yeah, we need to do this. And people are just interested in it because they eat out so much.
sure. I
Have you seen
remember.
it? I was going to ask Mark, have you seen it, or do you feel like, and Jeff, you can chime in on this too, that it's kind of grown? Because it seems like the last 10 years or so, give or take, there's been more this foodie movement, this effort to get out and try more foods and try different things and talk all about the foods and post them on Instagram and that sort of thing. Has that, do you think that's, I guess, influenced it at all?
Oh, I think so. I think it makes people want to eat out a whole lot more
Mhm.
and kind of
Mhm.
expand their palate. Um, I was just noticing some of the comments here. Let me put my glasses on. Sorry about that.
While you're,
Uh, well, Wes Branham says it is great to see you and Jeff live. Yes, it is good to see you guys. Now, the only
Thank you, Wes.
problem is people sort of knew what I looked like because I used to be fat on television too. But so now
that's
there's no illusion. We know exactly what you guys look at.
That's right.
Cassidy has asked, this is an interesting question. I get asked this a good bit. Do you
yeah.
use print for the news or a teleprompter?
Mm.
And on television, they use a teleprompter. The words kind of roll up in front of the camera. In radio, we write the newscast, and then when we sit down to read it, it we have what is in effect, it's like a teleprompter, but it's just on the computer screen in front of us. But we don't print out a hard copy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Save paper that way.
Yeah,
Right.
sometimes I wonder if we should, because we have a real problem with our computer at times
Yeah.
locking up.
Yeah. Might be a
He
good
did
backup.
that to me on a newscast the other day, and all of a sudden you're like, let's do a commercial.
Now this.
Now this, exactly.
Because you have to shut the system down and bring it back up again. Or let's go. Boomer did such a good job on that traffic report. Let's go to him one more time. Yeah.
Double down on Boomer.
Have you ever gotten to a spot, Mark or Brandon, where you didn't know what to say or where to go next? Does that ever happen where you just froze?
In boy, it used
TV
to happen
or
on television sometimes.
yeah, I was going to say I've got an experience on TV.
Once I was doing the 11 o'clock news, and you wear a little earpiece, you see the anchors, and that's mostly so that the director backstage can talk to you. And so we were into the opening music, and right about the time the camera was coming on, he said, "Nothing's ready. Go to page 13." So all of a sudden you're going, good evening. And having to find page 13 really fast.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's good.
I had an experience one time when, and it was just, how you are. Yeah, I was doing a live shot and I can't remember. It was at WBTV and it's been a number of years ago and I don't know what the subject was and I can't remember where I was. But I remember looking into the camera and I had rehearsed my lines. I'd memorized what my spiel was going to be. And it was, 20 or 30 seconds, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden a thought came into my head saying, boy, you're doing a good job. and you know what happens when that happens. All of a sudden, I lost my train of thought. I couldn't remember where I was, and I just fumbled my way through and then finally the director back at the the TV station saved me by just going to the story. And of course, I came back from the package, what we call the story, and then had to finish up my live shot. Got into the live truck, went back to the TV station. And then I think it was the managing editor at the time, came back and kind of patted me on the back and said, "Wasn't one of your finest live shots."
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's funny you say that, because when I started the small TV station in Boone, which is now gone under, maybe because of me, but either way, when I was working there, that was one of the most memorable moments, because we were a small operation, so I wrote all the news and then put it in all the teleprompter, and then I ran my own teleprompter as well. And something had happened and it glitched and it repeated all of the stories. So instead of going to the end of the newscast, it basically went to the very top, which was a ways up. And so I'm coming in to like wrap up with the final story. And then I'm like, oh no, where is this story? Where is this story? And so then it was like awkward silence. And then it was, what I do here, I'm not going to be able to get to this story in time, or it's going to be a long delay. And we're live. And so then I was just like, and good night.
We're done.
And to your point, my director came in there and goes, "Ooh, that was rough." Yep, I felt it.
Of course, the teleprompters now are computer driven. In the old days, though, they used to tape pieces of paper together. It would be a long string of 30 or 40 pages, and those pieces of paper would scroll under a camera, and that was projected in front of you, and that's what you read. Well, if the tape broke or something happened, then the teleprompter at that point was worthless. My wife used to come in on weekends and run the prompter for me because there was nobody to run it.
That's funny.
So Matt was asking each of you, who inspired your start in news?
That's a great question.
It is. I'm not sure an individual inspired it. I just, I was working at a small FM station and just got more and more interested in news instead of music. And I went out and covered, and I mean, I was just a kid, and covered a strike at a Big Star supermarket. And they were chanting and waving signs, and I got audio. And I came back and I thought, this was just the coolest thing. And I was just sort of hooked after that.
I think for me, it might have been, and I'm again showing my age, but John Chancellor. He was on NBC Nightly News, and I thought he was just the neatest thing. And you remember, the anchor desk back then they had a desk, and then they had a phone in the center of the desk, like a red phone. And I was just enthralled with just Chancellor, and of course Huntley Brinkley before that. We weren't CBS folks, and so we didn't watch Cronkite very much, but probably those 3 or 4 were the ones that kind of inspired me that I'd like to do that.
Anybody inspire you particularly, Brandon?
I kind of had a similar story to you, Mark. It wasn't necessarily anybody that got me into the industry. It was actually my sophomore year of high school that I thought I wanted to be an auto mechanic. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I realized I don't have the talent to do such a thing. So I needed things that didn't take a lot of talent with my hands. So then I had a friend that actually said, you like sports a lot. You should go into sports broadcasting. I thought, that's an interesting idea. And my high school at the time had a career-oriented class that you would take with other local high schools. It was called the Career Center. And so my senior year, I was able to take that class. It was a year long, and it was radio and TV production. And I took that and just fell in love with it. And then I actually had a guidance counselor in high school that said, well, Appalachian State's got a really good radio program. If you're interested in something like that, you should do that. And so toured it, fell in love with it. And then that's kind of how I got my start. But then along the way, there's been plenty of great personalities, great people that have thankfully and been very patiently taken me under their wing to teach me a lot and help unteach me a lot of things that was not beneficial to my career. So there's certainly a long list of those people.
I have a question here from Wes. He said, how about overlays, 2 reports going on at once? Is that heart stopping? That used to happen a little bit in television. Generally speaking, I don't think we ever have 2 things rolling at once. Sometimes we have things roll out of order. I had, even this morning, I played a little clip of some chanting at one of the Palestinian rallies locally, and it was supposed to then move on to the next clip, but it didn't. And I said a little something to set up the next clip, and it just played the chanting again. And I was like,
That's happened to me before too. You'll
Yeah.
stack the newscast. You'll put these audio clips in order, and you think, okay, this is going to be 1-2 seconds here. Then we're going to say, a couple of words, and we'll say 1 or 2 seconds. And I remember one morning I was at WBT, probably wasn't too long ago, and it just was a disaster. One played, and then
we have. Yeah, to answer Wes's question, I think, to both of your points, I mean, we have the issues where there will be the tech glitches. And so, and then there's sometimes in which you go to play the audio and it just decides it's not going to play. So then you have to, well, what do I do with this now? Because maybe it was a long voicer that you had set up to throw to this voicer, and now it's not playing, nothing's working. So then you have to figure out how to get out of that story, or just, improv for a bit and then move on without hopefully missing a beat too much, because it can unravel quick too, because once you get one mess up, it can lead to more.
That is the truth. I would be interested in hearing from some of our folks who are chiming in. What do you look for in a radio newscast? Our newscasts are only about 4 minutes, and it just flies by. And on a slow news day, then you're always, as we say, well, we're dumpster diving for news today. But on a lot of busy news days, which most of them are, sometimes it's like, man, I don't know how to fit all of this in. And sometimes you can't fit it all in.
Right.
Somebody said, Cassidy's asking, do you play the clips or does someone run them for you?
We play them. The way the system works is we write the newscast, we add the clips, and then once we sit down in the news closet to actually read the newscast, we trigger the sound bites as we go through. So you have to kind of keep an eye to make sure he stays in order.
And that closet is that we work from is quite the acrobatic button pushing as well. So we throw to elements to the board op, but we play all our audio clips, but then commercials are played elsewhere, and then we control traffic beds. So it's a lot of moving parts.
This is a good question. So on complex international stories, such as the current situation in Israel, do you guys try to follow journalists in those countries, such as Al Jazeera, or do you use AP, Fox? And the answer to that is all of the above. Yes, we subscribe to AP, we subscribe to Fox News. Through affiliations with television stations, we monitor CBS. But thanks to the internet, this morning I was clicking around to the Jerusalem Post and some other papers over there, just looking around because often you will pick up a tidbit when you do that you don't get from AP or from one of the other wire services.
I think that's the neat thing about radio news, at least for me. You mentioned it's 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, you can put a lot of things in there. And that's the beauty of WBT, I think, for folks in the morning when they're listening, and in the evening too. But in the morning, everything the way I approach the newscast is everything I feel like you need to know before you, or as you arrive at work, or as you head out the doors. And even if it's just 1 or 2 sentences of a story, then you can move on to something else. That's the beauty of radio news that I think is so exciting.
Yeah. And
Wes says he would like to hear the biggest local story mixed with national. I would say that's what we try to do.
Yeah.
And then he asks, are the traffic people in the studio or remote from home? Both, actually. I mean, generally they are right there with us. We're doing the newscasts in literally a little news closet, and to the left of us is Boomer or Pam. But sometimes Pam will work from home. She's equipped to do it from home as well. So it's a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
Each of you all make my day. This is Sandra Balker Miller. I rarely turn on television anymore. I grew up at WBT from early AM until late evening. Well, we love you.
Wow,
Thank you very much.
Sandra. Yeah.
Do you guys listen to the station much when you're not there?
Mm-hmm. I do. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard not to turn away and try to just kind of see what we're covering and if there's something. And I don't know about you guys, but also different day parts, I get the pleasure of being able to overlap. So I get to steal all of Mark's stuff and take credit for it, and then see what Anna's working on and see if I can steal that too. But then I don't get to listen to each of their newscasts at the very beginning or whatever. So when I'm coming into work, I like to try to make sure and getting ready for work to try to listen to Mark in the mornings. When I'm coming home, I like to try to listen to Anna's just to kind of see what they're covering, or did they have something new, or is this story been updated? And then that helps give me a head start for the next day as well.
If you're a news junkie like all three of us are, you want to know what's going on. And I'll find myself in the car quite a bit. And I'm listening to our newscast, and I'm listening to our hosts. And you've heard Bo say it before. WBT is probably one of the few stations across the country that's live and local from 5 in the morning until the time we get done at night, 8 o'clock at night. Yeah. That's amazing to have that much local programming at a television station, a 101-year-old station.
Yeah, truthfully,
go ahead.
Around the country, even a lot of the all news operations like WCBS in New York and 1010 Wins in New York, they're cutting staff. I mean, they're still doing all news, but they're cutting their staff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so much stuff is syndicated now. You don't have an operation. It's easy to, I used to have somebody that said this about sports, but this can apply to radio as well. It's easy when you're used to something to kind of take it for granted or just think that that's the way that everything is operated. And he was talking about a great quarterback at the time. And then when the new quarterback came in and wasn't as good, it's like, oh, wow, we really had something special. Well, WBT is certainly very special because most stations are going to a lot of syndicated programming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They don't have all local talent, like you mentioned, throughout the day. At least a portion of the day part is usually syndicated, but we're very blessed to have all the talent that we do.
Richie was asking, what are your most memorable stories? He said, I know Jeff used to be the South Carolina newsroom guy. Jeff, I didn't know that about you.
Yes. WBTV had a newsroom in Rock Hill, and for years worked with CN2, Cable News 2, the Comporium.
In Rock Hill, okay.
Cable News down there. And so I worked out of that newsroom early on when I was at WBTV. And then I think we got rid of that newsroom around 2001, maybe 2002. And Richie Knight was at Channel 9 at the time. And so we would run into Richie all the time. He was a great friend and a terrific photographer. And then Richie got out of the business, went to work for Lancaster County School District.
Oh, wow.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Richie has retired. He might join us on the chat here in a minute, but I think he's now has left there. So it's a family. I was going to say earlier, I think I'm the only non-Carolinian of the three of us because you grew up in Rock Hill, didn't you? Or where'd you grow up, Mark?
A few years early in Rock Hill, then the rest of the time around Southern Pines, Pinehurst area.
And then Brandon, you're from the Winston-Salem area.
Right. Yep. Winston-Salem.
Yeah, and you're from Missouri, Jeff?
I'm from Middle Missouri, a town called Kingdom City, Missouri, right in the center of the state along Interstate 70. And if you ever drive out to California on I-70, you'll pass my dad's farm. Dad still farms. He's 80 years old. And if you pass, if you're on I-77 headed west in between St. Louis and Kansas City, before you get to Columbia, you'll see my dad's farm. Be sure and stop in and tell him I said, I'll be home soon.
So do you pronounce it Missouri or is it Missouri? Because I've worked I've done stuff on the side for a station in Missouri, and there's a battle.
The answer is yes. I always said Missouri, but my mom said Missouri, and I think I kind of likened it to Cincinnati and Cincinnati. Cincinnati sounds kind of weird to me, and so people say Cincinnati. So that's just what we've always said.
It's funny you mentioned that. I did some a little work on the side for a while for a station in Louisville, but they were very quick to tell me, "Oh no, you do not say Louisville. You go Louisville. Kind of swallow it, Louisville, because if you say Louisville, then they will know you're not from around here." So so now I'm in the habit of going Louisville. Hey, Richie Knight says he's not retired. He's at Buford High in Lancaster teaching broadcast journalism.
And those students have a great teacher. That's fantastic.
Wes asked if we all miss the early years of creative loafing newspaper. He said he does. Wow, I hadn't thought about creative loafing in a long time. There's a paper now. What's it called? That's similar to it.
Yeah.
Can't think of the name of it.
Can't think of it either.
Creative Loafing did restaurant reviews, didn't they?
I think so. Yeah, they did all kinds of stuff. And,
Yeah.
and in fact, they used to do some investigative work. Tara Servatius used to work
Gracious.
for them
Mhm.
and was kind of known as a muckraker with them before she got into radio. And so, yeah, I miss that. I miss the old days of the Charlotte Observer. I
Me too.
mean, not to be ugly, but the paper's just not what it used to be. I mean, when I first came to Charlotte and I would go to a press conference, it was intimidating because the Observer would send 5 reporters to a press conference and they were all asking really good questions. And so you're thinking, I'm not going to say anything. I might embarrass myself. And now the Observer, so much they've cut staff. There are a lot of stories locally they don't even cover anymore. And it's kind of sad.
It is sad.
I think newspaper reporters were some of the best and asked some of the best questions out there. They dug deep to get to they were the undercover stories, and we've lost an element of news without that aspect anymore because newspapers are unfortunately kind of going by the wayside.
I remember when I'd go on and would do stories and interview somebody, first thing I would, this is when I was in TV, I would look at them and say, listen, this is not the Wall Street Journal. we're not going to get that deep with this. So I'm not going to ask you anything you don't already know. And that seemed to set most people at ease.
John Stokes did news for about 30 years in the mornings on WBT, big, deep voice, and just so good. And he was a master at really telling a story like in 3 sentences. But, obviously in 3 sentences, you're not giving a lot of detail. But he used to go, if they want more, they can read the paper. That's his life. If they want more, they can read the paper. Now, I'm not sure that's always the case. So let's see. We have another interesting question here. Are journalists trained to view atrocities somehow, thinking of all the recent footage and streaming out of Israel? Are journalists able to pass on reporting those things if they're disturbed? The short answer to that is no. There's no training to prepare you for dead bodies. Not to be crass, but I've been to some plane crash sites that just, no, you're not prepared for that. But you have this sort of capability to compartmentalize and just sort of get the job done. And then you think about what you saw later. Would you say, guys?
I remember doing a story for Channel 3, and this has been a number of years, and this was in Charlotte. A guy committed suicide and we were rolling on at the time, and all the cameras were, because it was on Albemarle Road, just past W.T. Harris, and he was holed up at a convenience store. And this was a number of years ago. It almost seems like these kinds of things happen more frequently, but this was very unusual that it happened. And it was disturbing to a lot of people, including this reporter.
Yeah. I think one of the most disturbing ones I had to do, there was a wreck when I was working for the TV station in Boone. And essentially a lady had collided with a semi truck, but it had literally torn the car in half. And so I was one of the first ones at the scene. I was down there right almost as paramedics had gotten down there. And it was not a pretty scene. And so that was, to Mark's point, it's startling. It's not easy to take in, and you realize this is not a movie. This is real life now. But then you kind of put on your journalistic hat and say, okay, now let me try to tell this story without, I don't have to go into the most gruesome details and horrify people, but I do need to tell this story as to what has happened here and kind of be able to package this. So yeah, it's difficult. And I certainly feel for anybody that's reporting from Israel right now with the atrocities that are going on there and having to see that firsthand. But it's kind of like another gear that you go into as a broadcaster to try to figure out how to tell that story and make it real and bring it to life to what we're seeing.
I'll tell you a story that's both kind of weird in that regard and also funny. a number of years ago, well, when I was working in Durham, there was a search on around Burlington for this woman who had been missing, and it was thought she had been murdered. And so the search was on in a wooded area on a Saturday morning, and I got there with a cameraman, and I was sort of horrified to see that there were a group of young Boy Scouts who were helping in the search. I mean, we're talking 9 and 10-year-olds. And I thought, well, that's a little weird. So all the searchers broke up into groups, and pretty soon on the radio, we hear it crackle and say, "We found the body." So we get to this clearing, and it was a horrible scene. There was this woman there, and she had been murdered, and all of her clothes were strewn in the trees. Her body had been found by some Boy Scouts. The scoutmaster then comes along, and I'm not kidding, as Brett Jensen would say, "I promise you I'm telling the truth." The scoutmaster makes all the kids sit down on these logs, and he said, "All right, you can get your bags out for lunch now."
Oh no!
Right there in front of where this woman was lying dead in the woods. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? So I'd still like to find out who that scoutmaster is. I mentioned that on the air in the story that night, and we got a lot of pushback from people like, "Why would you report that?" And I'm like, why would he have done that?
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy.
This Cassidy has a nice thing to say. She says, "I think though it's important for those of us of faith to pray for our reporters because they do see a lot of gnarly things." Yeah,
That's very nice. Very true,
nice.
Cassidy.
Very
Thank
kind.
you.
Yeah. Richie asked, "Favorite story of your career?" That's a good one, and I wrote that down as a possible talking point. I'd like to hear what yours are, Mark and Brandon.
Well, Mark's the true storyteller there, so I'm
No, I'm just
dying
old.
to
I've just had
hear
a lot of practice.
I'm sure you got a lot to trifle
Boy,
through.
it's really hard. I think probably some of my favorites were when I was doing the Carolina Camera on Channel 3. I mean, a story that's just gotten so much play, even on YouTube, that's almost 40 years old now, is the bean shooter man, this chicken farmer from Ashboro who just had this uncanny ability with a slingshot. I mean, in the story, and it's on YouTube, you can see it. He points down to his cornfield and he goes, "You want that weed to fall to the right or to the left?" And you go, "Well, to the right." And he just fires a rock down there and it goes in the direction he wants it to. I mean, honestly, that's probably the most memorable story, or one of my favorites, because people bring it up every now and then from time to time. And he ended up on the Johnny Carson show
Wow.
because of his skills, and they set up some stuff for him to shoot on the stage. And we went and did a follow-up with him after he got back from California. And I never will forget, he said, "I ain't never seen a place that had more things that nobody needs." That was his impression of Hollywood. He had no interest in it at all.
Did you do the tree climbing dog story on Carolina Camera?
I sure did. Flat Nose, the tree climbing dog. That was on YouTube as well. Little tiny town in South Carolina, and this mixed breed. It was mostly bulldog, I think. And the owner would go, "Go get it, boy," and he could just shimmy right up a tree. It was remarkable. I'll tell you a story about that too. He ended up we had a good relationship with the Carson show. They would call every now and then and say, "Do you have any real crazy people you could send our way?" And I go, "Yeah, I do." And so Flat Nose and his owner are on the Tonight Show, and Doc Severinsen, and they set up a tree for Flat Nose to climb. And Doc Severinsen, the band leader, said, "If that dog climbs that tree, I'll kiss his butt."
No.
Really? Yep. He climbed the tree, and they made Doc come over and kiss that dog's backside.
How did you get that set up with the Carson show? Did they just latch on to one of your stories at one time or something?
Yeah, somehow they had heard that we did regular feature stories. And so I got a call from a producer out there one day introducing herself, and she said, "We check with feature reporters around the country, and we're always looking for interesting people." So we got the bean shooter man on there and Flat Nose, and I'm trying to think who else, but those were the two that Carson himself apparently really enjoyed having on the show.
That's how he got such great guests to come on to do the crazy things, because they had people across the country. That's awesome.
That's a great idea. Yeah. No wonder his show was so good.
How about you,
Yeah,
Brandon?
I don't watch the late night stuff now because I have to get up so early, but I had sort of stopped watching it a few years ago. So what are some memorable stories you guys have done?
I mean, for me, one of the most memorable ones was one of the toughest ones too. The Charleston shootings
Mm,
at the church. Obviously, you take there's so many different angles. There's so much stuff, the hate that was involved behind the shooting, but the tragedy, the fact that a house of worship, which nobody 20 years ago would have thought would ever anybody would ever have any sort of violence there, and it kind of just broke that barrier down, that security protection. But I think what made it so memorable and so touching was that it wasn't a one-sided story or just one level, as I like to call it. It had multiple layers to where then there was forgiveness that was brought in. And then there was the victims of these families coming in and saying, we're not going to let this divide us. We're going to let it bring us together. And we're going to choose forgiveness over hating this person or really resenting this person. And so just covering that and seeing how, I mean, I couldn't imagine if somebody had killed some family members of my own, let alone at a church, how I would have reacted. But
mm.
the way they just showed love and grace, forgiveness, and it was encouraging. It was inspiring. And I even remember one of the victims, the son of a lady that was killed. The Yankees took him up, and they created this great story. They had this great time where he came up to New York, and they originally were just trying to do something to show him around, and then he wound up through this little thing that they were just going to try to make it just a nice day for him. He encouraged them, and then it became its own story
Mhm.
of how he interacted with his team and the management, and then so it was just it was a really unique story in that sense, and one that it's kind of always stuck in my mind throughout the many stories that we talk about.
Something else that people wonder about too is, do we get some sort of strange pleasure out of interviewing victims of crimes or victims of tragedy? And I tell you,
Mhm.
that's a hard thing to do.
Mm,
Um, I still remember back in '79 when half the town of Shelby blew up. I don't know
Mhm.
if you remember that, Jeff, or not. There were 5
Yeah.
buildings and a gas explosion. Several firefighters were killed. And I got the name of one of the firefighters who was killed pretty quickly the next morning. And of course, the people in the newsroom were going, go, 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 go interview the widow, go interview the widow. So, a photographer and I pulled up in their yard, and there were cars there, obviously friends and family. And I just stood there in the front yard, just walking in circles because I didn't want to go knock on that door and bother those people. So I'm just standing there, and the photographer's like, "Well, what are you going to do?" And I was like, "I don't know." And finally, this big old boy comes out of the house, and I thought, well, I'm in trouble now. And he was like, "What do you people want?" And I said, and the firefighter's name was Floyd Sharts.
Mm.
And I just said, I'm sorry to bother you. I just thought maybe Mrs. Sharts might like to talk about her husband." And he kind of glared at me, and then he said, "Hang on a minute." And he went in the house, and then he came back and said, "Come on in." And we sat
Mhm.
down, and to this day, 40 some odd years later, that woman did the sweetest interview about her husband. But I tell you, I mean, I didn't like knocking on that door. And I don't think reporters get a lot of pleasure out of that. I think sometimes people think we do, but we don't.
Richie said in the comment section, it's what drove him out of the business, and I can see that. It is one of the hardest things to do, to knock on that door. The only way that I was able to rationalize it was to say to myself, people deal with grief differently. Some people would, you know, slam the door in your face, and understandably so. You're meeting them at their worst hour, at their worst moment. And then others would have an experience like you, Mark, and I'd like to tell you about my husband, or I want to tell you about my son or daughter. And television news and radio news and newspaper, we are able to tell that story, and it is kind of maybe therapeutic and comforting to that person who's lost that
And
loved one, to be able to grieve like that, and let others know about who they were.
and on the other side of that, when we had the shooting out at UNCC a few years ago, I was the first reporter to show up at one of the victims' homes, and somebody came out of the house and said they do not want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I understand that. And I was getting ready to leave. And then all of a sudden, as I'm getting ready to leave, 4 other media people came up. And I just told them, I said, well, I'm leaving because they don't want to talk. And one of the media guys was from the Today Show. And he goes, I'll get them to talk. And I thought, all right, I'll stand around and watch this. So he goes bounding down the driveway. And he wasn't down there very long. And then another guy comes up and said, if you people don't leave, we're calling the sheriff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you do run into some very different situations, but it is not, well, maybe the Today Show enjoys it, but I don't enjoy that.
Yeah.
We have a question about, we have someone teaching journalism in high school. High school teacher tried to start up some news shows. If you guys were in charge of setting up a radio internet news broadcast, what are some of the ideas you would try? That's a good question.
Question.
What would you try?
Brandon's the youngest one here. Brandon, why don't you take this one?
He still remembers what it was like to be in school. What should they try?
Getting more and more distant, but yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that we're learning, and sometimes radio can be behind the 8 ball, as many other medias are, is how much technology is changing. And so with that, I mean, 15 years ago, none of us were making sure we're checking Twitter or X now, or seeing what they had on their YouTube streams and that sort of thing. But now that's a very big part of our lives now. Sometimes that's where we are able to get press conferences, is on a YouTube channel, or sometimes we won't name the police organization, but sometimes police organization would rather put stuff on X or Twitter first before sending anything to us.
He's talking about CMPD, by the way.
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, a local one. But either way, so I would talk about how I'd want to make sure that when you speak of media, it's so integrated now. It's not radio and newspaper and TV and social media. It's really kind of taking in all of those, especially as we're looking at sources to build news, as we're looking to get news out there, and how they play together, because they can both feed into each other. I mean, we're looking at a stream right now to be able to engage our audience on the radio, and then we promote that, on the actual air itself. And much the same way we do that, we try to do that with a lot of our breaking stories. And Mark's done that. In fact, even before I came here to WBT, I remember seeing Mark's story when they had one of the crane collapses earlier this year.
Oh,
I remember them posting his Twitter handle, or X, and seeing that, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Just how they integrate it. So those are all feeding into each other. So a matter of keeping up with the times of technology, of how people receive information. Most of us all have one of these. We got a smartphone, and that's how we get a lot of our quickest information. I sign up for notifications from local news organizations to see what are they reporting, and do they have something first. And so I would say about how, one of the main topics is how to integrate the different aspects of media, and how they can work together. They don't have to be separate or enemies. They can actually have a coordinated attack together.
Well, the question about the journalism teacher, give us a call in the newsroom. I'd love to work with you on that. I think it would be fun. If you could tell the kids, okay, look, we're going to do 3 10-minute newscasts a week, and just come up with some ideas on campus of stories, I mean, if it's a Charlotte-Mecklenburg school, my word, you've got lots of things you could talk about, from security at football games to, some feature stories, and let them use their smartphones to get some interviews and then put some stuff together. Oh, we can help you with that. I think that would be a lot of fun.
It's a great time to be in media. Look at that, Bo Thompson.
Oh,
What a
Bo.
nice fella.
oh,
He's the real
guy.
deal,
He is.
everybody. Yeah. But I mean, there's just covering the news of your school. And I don't know if our person who was commenting told us the school that he or she was at, just said it, teaching high school. I mean, you can shoot video with this. Get audio. There's all kinds of things that I mean, again, it'd be fun to work with them on that. It's a
It
good
really
idea.
would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now,
And I would want to say, one of the things that Mark does really well, as has already been said in the comments, and if you've ever listened to one of his reports, is tell a story. And there's not that many gifted storytellers anymore, especially in radio. But Mark's truly a diamond in the rough on that end, and one of the prime examples. So, Mark, you could definitely relay to them of how to tell a story, of how to find a story too. You got to find a story that's entertaining, or that you can make entertaining to draw listeners in as well. So I think you do a great job on that topic.
oh,
Mark, I think you're such a great storyteller in radio because you were a great storyteller on television. And you can weave in, I mean, I've heard Bo say it and others say it, it's a theater of the mind. You can weave in that sound into a piece where your mind just takes you there. So when you're interviewing this, what was it, the fried lady? What was her name at the state fair last week?
Oh, the queen of deep fry.
The queen of deep fried. I texted you afterwards and said, I just felt like I was there. I didn't need video to take me there. I was transported there by the audio, by your sound, and weaving in what we call natural sound into the story.
I tend to put together stories like I used to put them together in television, because it's really the only way I know to do it. If I could find a different way, I probably would. Ann Wright mentions on here, she said she liked our presentation of news. She said, such as the Clemson story today, it was a nice break from international news. Now,
Wasn't it?
earlier in the evening, we were talking about, how we pick stories. And I have to tell you, in the morning, sometimes I pick stories that I just go, wow, that's really interesting. And that's the case with the Clemson story. There was a protest down there, in case you're not familiar with it. The young Republicans wanted to know, why are there tampon dispensers in the men's rooms? And so they complained, and Clemson took the dispensers out. And so then some LGBTQ students held a rally against that. They wanted the machines put back. So, there's just so much craziness going on in the world today. And when I saw that over the weekend, and we had some sound from the young Republicans and some of the other folks involved, I thought, yeah, I need to do that story just because
Fox
it's interesting.
Fox Radio News had that story over the weekend as well.
Did they?
Yeah, it was one of those. Yeah.
Begs to be done.
I need to put my glasses on to read some of the comments. Well, somebody Jim Kress, and he's a broadcaster as well. I know him. Congratulates Bo and Beth for being the best. Bo and Beth for being the best in Charlotte. He listens every morning. He thinks they're great. I do too. Bo and Beth are a lot of fun to work with. What's interesting is, I'll give you some inside scoop here. I have worked with people who were just insufferable. I've been blessed in my career, not too many, but a few. But I'm telling you, I've never had such a situation where everybody is just so easygoing and fun to work with. Bo and Beth are a lot of fun to work with. Boomer is just great to work with. Jim Zoki seems like, and you guys, I mean, we really do have a good time in doing this.
Yeah, it's amazing to me to be in a group like this at WBT, at least at this period of our existence, where it sounds cliche and it sounds corny, but it is a family. It really is. These are genuine people that you hear, and they're just, they're like they are on the air, behind the water cooler at the same time. So yeah, it's a good place.
Yeah, I said that at News and Brews at the last News and Brews, but yeah, there can be, as we probably have all worked with at least one or two. There can be some pretty fake people out there at times, but WBT's got truly authentic on the air, off the air. They're just as nice as ever, and easy to work with. And there could be egos in that room because there's plenty of talent that I'm looking at on my screens right now, but neither one of those guys has one shred of arrogance about them, and much the same way for the wonderful people at WBT. Just great staff.
Well, we've had some nice comments from people here tonight, and Catherine, thank you. We're glad you like our voices. And Matt Tollison says, "Nice microphone, Mark." Well, your dad recommended this, so he engineered the station. So, although I have to tell you, I went out and bought a webcam today. I didn't have one, and I mean, you would think I would have, but I didn't, and so I was surprised how cheap they were. So, and it worked, so that's good.
Yeah, that's the most important part.
I think we're getting the wrap it up here.
Yeah, I think you're telling us to wrap this up. Dry Otter Waterproofing was kind enough to pay real money to sponsor this, and we thank you for that. Let's see. So now Wednesday night is the next session of this. Who's on Wednesday night? Do you guys know? I'm not sure.
Oh, that's a good question.
We should have known this.
You should know. Yeah. I know. That's kind of embarrassing.
I heard
just tune in and find out. It'll be good.
Right. It'll be a surprise.
All right, fellas, I'll see you tomorrow at work.
Yeah.
All right.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Mark.
And good night, everybody. Thank you for watching.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.